Labas rytas, mėly dalyviai ir žiūrovai, sveikinu Jūs prisijungus į Lietuvos architektų sąjungos organizuojamą tarptautinę konferenciją Architektūros politika, naujas žvilgsnis. Aš esu Rūta Leitanaitė, Lietuvos architektų sąjungos pirmininkė ir moderuosiu šią konferenciją. O dabar iš pagarbos absoliučiai daugumai mūsų konferencijos pirmosios dalies pranešėjų toliau kalbėsiu angliškai. So, good morning to all of you. For the courtesy of our guests and participants, I will continue in English. Lithuania is one of the few countries that doesn't have an architecture policy as a document confirmed by the government. But Lithuania is one of the few countries that have an architecture law. However, we believe that the architecture law is just one tool out of many possible that would secure continuous holistic implementation of architecture policy. There's a plan by the Lithuanian Ministry of Environment to start consultations and to draft the document of architecture policy of Lithuania in 2022. This is the next year. So Architects Association of Lithuania, as an independent association of architecture professionals, is initiating a public discussion on a possible vision of the national architecture policy. This conference will analyze through various examples, experiences, opinions, and ideas the most efficient format, the content, the stakeholders, the tools and methods for creation, implementation, and evaluation of the state's architecture policy. Additionally, Lithuania would aim to create an architecture policy that would address the topics relevant for the whole Europe and globally, and correspond to the new European Bauhaus and Davos Declaration values. But before I dive into an explanation of today's conference schedule and topics, I would like to invite our distinguished guests of the conference to say some welcome words. So, at first, I would like to invite a Vice Minister of Environment, Darius Kvedaravičius, to speak.
Labadiena visiems, good morning to everybody. Man tikrai didelė garbė, nors taip netikėtai ir ministro vardu turiu atsiprašyti visų, kad jisai negalėjo, kad šios sveikinimo žodžio šiek tiek užtruko kitose renginiuose, tai ta garbė teko man. Ačiū, kad pakvietėt. Puikiai architektų sąjungos iniciatyva pradėti diskutuoti, pradėti kelti tokius esminius, labai svarbius mums visiems šios srities klausimus. Turbūt pasakysiu banalybę, kad architekto vaidmuo visuomenėje yra ypatingai svarbus ir architektų idėjos yra būtinos ir šiandien, jų būtinybė keliama per tokias iniciatyvas kaip naujasis Europos Bauhausas. Ir šiandien sparčiai besikeičiančiame pasaulyje iškyla daug klausimų, į kuriuos daugelį atsakymų matyt pasiūlys architektai. Ir jie atsakys į klausimą, kaip toliau gyvensime mūsų miestuose, kaip toliau galės vystytis mūsų visuomenė. Tema architektūros politikos yra labai plati, apimanti labai daug svarbių sričių, tiek kultūrinių, tiek socialinių. Ir aplinkos ministerija, kaip valstybės politikos, kaip viešojo sektoriaus politikos formuotoja, matyt, nenorėtų likti viena šiame kovos lauke. Todėl dar kartą noriu padėkoti organizatoriams už puikią idėją, už puikų renginį ir palinkėti mums visiems labai įdomios dienos.
Thank you, Vice Minister. I hope that you will join us as promised for the afternoon session in the Lithuanian Parliament together with the Minister of Environment. And I would like to invite Daina Urbanavičienė, the Vice Minister of Culture, to give some welcoming words.
Dear all, good morning. Welcome to today's conference on architectural policy. And of course, I'm convinced that the aesthetic obligation exists in architecture, but does such an obligation exist and is there, on the other hand, also is a right to ugliness? How to balance aesthetic and ecological goals, functional needs, and costs? Does architecture have an influence on our well-being beyond the simple satisfaction of our primary needs for housing, for privacy, for example, for comfort? These are some of the questions that concern architectural and cultural policies today. In order to achieve quality in the built environment that adds to the quality of life of the citizens, we need to have a good architectural policy. Going through the other countries is very clear, visible, especially Nordic countries have started decades earlier and have a long tradition in architectural policy. But even if we are late, we seek to do it well. And in the eyes of the authorities, public buildings need to show quality in architectural design and construction. And architectural competition is organized for the construction of new public buildings and for the renovation of old ones. More and more, this is also the case for municipalities, and local authorities formulate their own architectural policy. To steer this process in a targeted way is essential for Lithuanian country. So the Ministry of Culture hopes that today's conference will give us strong inspiration and insights to have architectural policy document finally. So I wish you a successful and fruitful conference, and thank you.
Thank you, Vice Minister Daina Urbanavičienė, and I also hope to see you in the afternoon session as promised. We will meet at the Lithuanian Parliament. And now I will get back to the explanation of the structure of this conference. So this conference will consist of two parts. The first part of the conference will deal with the European experience. So now we will have a multinational and very professional panel to share examples, trends, and innovative ideas. After 6 presentations, we will have a discussions with all the panelists. So the first part of the conference will be in English, and we should finish at approximately 1:15. Then we will have a lunch break, and the second part of the conference will be dedicated to Lithuanian architectural policy and will be held in the Parliament of Lithuania. The discussion will be directly broadcast on the Facebook of Architects Association of Lithuania and the YouTube channel of the Parliament. We will have the members of the Parliament, the Minister and the Vice Minister of the Environment and the Vice Minister of Culture, together with a group of architects representing architectural organizations and schools. The afternoon discussion will be held in Lithuanian language. We will start the afternoon discussion at 2:30, so be sure to come back from your lunch break and join us again. And the last practicality for our audience. After all the presentations of the first part, we will have a discussions with all the panelists. So feel free to write questions or comments in the Facebook page of Architects Association of Lithuania below the broadcast window. If we have time, I will forward them to panelists and we will discuss them. And now I would like to invite our first panelist. We will start our discussion about European policies and the experience from the broader point of view. The first 2 presentations will deal with a pan-European view on architecture policies. And I would like to give the floor to our first panelist, Veronika Walk-Siska, who is a PhD. She's a chartered architect and an advisor of architecture and design at the Ministry of Culture of Estonia. She is also an educator and researcher at the Taltech Academy of Architecture and Urban Studies and the Smart City Center of Excellence. In 2020-2021, Veronika chaired an open method of coordination, OMC group of EU member states experts on high quality architecture and built environment for everyone. Of course, she has a vast experience of building and designing a lot of buildings. She has been awarded with many awards, but I will save some minutes for Veronika to continue with her presentation. So Veronika, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ruta, for the kind words and also for your kind invitation. It's a true privilege and a real pleasure to be here and present the work of the EU member state experts on architecture and high quality living environment for everyone that we have conducted over past 18 months. I will so dear Vice Minister, dear colleagues, dear architects and friends of architecture, my presentation today will be about the findings and observations of the OMC expert group, where we had members from about 40 members from about 23 member states, and also Norway and Switzerland. So we titled the report towards a shared culture of architecture, investing in a high quality living environment for everyone. And as you see already from the title page, we will be addressing awareness raising from early on, because this is one of the key topics, just to jump ahead in a little bit in the presentation. So I hope that you see my slides. Can you please confirm, Rutta? Is my screen visible?
Yes, Veronica, everything works perfectly.
Thank you. So what is the framework of our work? Basically, in the work plan for culture on a EU level, 2019 to 22, under the stream of cohesion and well-being, we had a mandate adopted by member states in council, in the Cultural Affairs Committee, already in 2018, pretty much. So it goes a few years back when the whole initiation of the OMC group was founded, and so the output is a policy handbook with recommendations and a toolkit that we presented about 2 months ago in a final conference in Austria and Slovenia. And also, as of just a couple of days ago, we're very lucky to have council conclusions that really build also on our work while addressing the new European Bauhaus agenda. So what we've witnessed, looking at a timescale, what we've witnessed is more and more attention to quality aspects in regards to architecture and the living environment from 2015 onwards, especially because, of course, we are building on a legacy, a huge legacy of the European architecture policies that go back a few decades. We also have on the European level, the European Union Prize for Contemporary Architecture, already established in 1988, now known as EU Mies Award, also accompanied by Young Talent Architecture Award since 2016. We've been part of different European Forum for Architecture Policies events in different countries, and continued now as a series of conferences since 2017. Of course, we are also building on former very important documents such as the Council resolution from 2001 and conclusions from 2008. But then in 2015, we have, or since 2015, we have the UN Agenda 2030 together with the Sustainable Development Goals, which I think have been a great step forward in raising awareness on the urgency that we're facing in terms of the changes that concern the environment. And also we have the urban agenda for the EU. We have a Leipzig Charter from 2007 and the new Leipzig Charter from 2020. And most importantly, I would say we have a very important agreement among the different ministers of culture in Europe due to Davos Declaration from January 2018, and followed by a process that has led to Baukultur quality system developed by the Davos team and published this year, this spring. So it's very recent, but it really is a bullseye in a way that helps us to target the quality goals when we talk about the quality of living environment. What we did in the OMC group was that we mapped in terms of synergy seeking, we mapped the different larger policies, programs that have a strong link with what we describe as these goals for quality, and we see that there are very strong synergies with the European Green Deal, especially because of the renovation wave and also the new European Bauhaus and the Circular Economy Action Plan, but many others as well. So the whole Horizon Europe program, together with its EU missions and partnerships, and also what we highlight is the importance of the different funding opportunities that have come with pandemic crisis. So there are many things where we can think of. There are many programs and instances where we can think of synergies between the quality goals for the living environment and also then what is actually being done at the European level in terms of implementing these different policies through programs and different measures. And what we see, or what we stumbled upon, is that the quality-driven approaches, that we know that they should inform various existing and future policy areas, but the quality aspects for high quality living environment are not yet included in all relevant policies, initiatives and programs, although, for instance, considerations relating to cultural heritage and culture are already to some extent embedded in cohesion policy, but we could do so much more. And what we are saying in the report is that it's crucial to include quality criteria when drafting relevant new work programs and when updating new policies and strategies and regulations and guidelines. So, not to mention, we need to share best practices and implement quality assessment systems. So this is what we now try to surface in the report, and ways how to do it, and what we are missing out on so far, and how we can improve our approach in advancing the living environment. And so what we emphasize is that culture is key, that we do need to place greater emphasis on the cultural dimension of our living environment. And we need to plan the future with quality in mind. We need to see the bigger picture, promote cultural design, and of course, strengthen competencies. And we acknowledge the need of capacity building on multiple governance levels, especially in terms of qualifying the decision makers. And in a long-term vision, we need to start early. And we really need to raise awareness on the qualitative aspects of the living environment across the societies from an early age. And when we speak about the living environment, then we do not apply the approach to the field of architecture in a narrow sense, but we really mean it in a broader perspective in terms of also landscape architecture, urban planning, and urban governance. Because as we also state in the report, that the living environment is made up of a combination of artificial and natural environments. So we are looking at both outdoor, indoor spaces, and we're talking about things that we can do to improve the living environment for as many people as possible in the long term. And the report itself is quite extensive. I put some links in the Zoom chat, but maybe it's also possible to share them on Facebook stream. So these are direct links to the report, which is quite extensive. As I said, it's 142 pages altogether. So of course I don't have time to present it all, but I point out some key aspects that we really want to deliver. So first of all, we build on the Davos Baukultur quality system that has established these 8 concepts and criteria of quality: governance, functionality, economy, environment, diversity, context, sense of place and beauty. And on the other hand, what we did was that we gathered different case studies across Europe from the OMC members. We received altogether 76 plus case studies, and analyzing them, we chose 33 that were most representative ones, and we divided them into 8 categories: awards, laws and policies, education and awareness raising, regeneration and revitalization, tools, processes and research, funding and investment, grassroots initiatives, and technical innovation. And Lithuanian examples stood out, especially in education awareness raising, but also in laws and policies, of course, because you have this very special law. And as also exemplified by Ruta and her activity, you have a very strong this non-governmental side to really voicing the quality aspects and aspirations for the living environment. So I will just run through some of the case studies, because we don't have time to really go deep into it, but just that you get an idea of what we were looking at. In terms of awards, because awards are a very good tool for awareness raising. What does it mean when we talk about the quality of living environment? Give me an example. So awards are very good mechanisms or tools to make it very visible what we value in the environment, and what the and who's behind it also. So in terms of awards, we dig deeper onto the local level, beyond the very well-known EU Mies Award or the Pritzker Prize, and we highlight the importance of, for instance, municipality architect, or also the client, when it's a smart client doing something special, for the living environment. Then laws and policies. Next to the Lithuanian law, we also highlight Catalonia's law on architecture from 2017, and also different policies that do some interesting things, both in terms of the local level as well as the national level. Then talking about education and awareness raising, we've got many examples, because of course there are, well, you have an architecture fund in Lithuania, there are architecture centers in many countries, but also what we were really keen to look at was how do we raise awareness from early on. So, and we also received some good examples from Lithuania, how to teach architecture to kids and young people. So we are highlighting here these different ways of advancing architectural education, both within the formal educational system as well as informally. Here's an example from Finland, the Salvas project, Ori's house from Croatia, an example, a training kit from Poland, and also Landluft from Austria, a different approach. We were also looking at regeneration and revitalization, adaptive reuse cases across Europe. These are bigger restoration work schemes, such as one from Malta, or the Revive program from Portugal, or Clona Kilty 400 from Ireland, that really help the municipalities to do something with public space and really advance the approaches there. Then in terms of tools, processes and research, we looked at visionary projects such as Panorama Netherlands that really try to bring a broader and long-term perspective to where we are going in terms of developing the living environment. But a great tool, for instance, is also design review system from Ireland, or immersive residences programs from France, or open call from Belgium. But you can take a look at those things in the report as we explain them there. Funding and investment. A good example here is the transformation of Cité du Grand Parc Bordeaux from France, a project which architects tend to know very well. It's been well published, and I think righteously so. It's received a lot of attention because of its sophistication. It's by Lacaton and Vassal, and it's a clever scheme of using EU funding and different funding sources to build together with the locals and to really improve the quality of life for the residents. Also another program, Culture 1.5% from Spain. This Lacaton Vassal, different views into the project. This is the Culture 1% for Culture from Spain program, which is impressive in terms of its scale, because as we got to know, they've done more than 1,500 different projects in 600 municipalities. I think this scale is also quite impressive. And in terms of grassroots initiatives, we know many from Baltic countries. So we also highlight citizen activism in Riga here, just as an example of many similar initiatives. And also we give an example of Kaabelitehta's creative hub in Finland, because this conversion of former industrial sites into creative hubs is quite well known across Europe. But here also, in terms of the Finnish case study, the ownership structure gives a good example of diversity. That is one of the quality concepts in the Davos system. So this is a Latvian example. And finally, technical innovation. We looked at reuse, clever use of materials and new technologies. So here is Sara Kulturhus from Sweden, as an example of high-rise timber construction, and also steampunk installation from Tallinn Architecture Biennale, which this installation was built solely with virtual reality, augmented reality tools. So overarching recommendations, very briefly, I just run through it and then I stop. We emphasize the driving role of the public sector. Everybody has to have access to knowledge about quality, and that is why this is essential to raise awareness of the topic early on. Decision makers need to subscribe to quality, and not only by following the best practice, but also bringing about new knowledge and skills. And this all should happen in co-creation with quality in mind, with residents and then different target groups and then interest groups. Consistency in planning is very important, because if we do something on one administrative level, then we need to make sure that we follow these principles down to the implementation. And regulation and standards and guidelines need to support achieving quality, and that is why the funding measures and the investment mechanisms in overall, looking at this picture, really need to target the quality of the built environment and be smart in that sense. And the driving role of the public sector here is very, very important. So, okay, looking at Lithuania, what can you do? Well, we provide this success recipe at national level. And I think it's important to keep in mind when drafting up a policy paper. Of course, it is important to have a strategic plan with specific goals for quality living environment. And a policy for architecture policy is a fantastic tool in that sense. But, and now I remind you from our experience in Estonia, we have an architecture policy since 2002, but no plan implements itself. You need a team to implement the plan. So together with the policy, it would be really efficient and essential to make sure that there is a team. It can be a state architect team, as we see in many different European countries in very successful models. But we can also use a city architect offices network or this kind of distribution on a local level. We can use the systems of design review panels or similar, but we need to make sure that there are people who are competent people who are able to really implement the plan. So competency and capacity building and making sure that there are people behind the plan. This is really essential. Of course, as I said, making sure that quality goals are followed across all levels of governance, very important. All key stakeholders need to be on board, and investment plans, be they EU sources, national sources, local sources, must be linked to the goals for quality of the built environment. And then you can have the policy paper as a central point of reference, always on the table, linking it back to everyone and the budget. So this is very, very briefly. We also provide a toolkit. So whenever you're making a decision, you can use this toolkit to do your own evaluation if you're reaching quality goals according to the Davos system. So you have an empty template that you can fill out. On the other hand, you have a set of this compact set of questions per criterion that help you to assess whether you're on the right track and whether you considered all aspects carefully. We also in the report, we highlight the importance of architects and the role of architects, because architects and designers are well-placed brokers between these different lines of work and expertise. And also architects, on the other hand, have a very solid track record in interrogating the quality of the built environment and are well equipped to use this knowledge and experience and capacity to spark discussions. So with that in mind, I think we are in a place where there is very certain urgency to act, and architects are able and have a critical role in this acting and in articulating the opportunity to engage with the environment and just think about space in a new way, and how architecture and nature also interrelate. And a huge thanks to all that participated in the OMC work, especially to Ygbe, who was a great support from the European Commission side. And the full report with the resources will be available soon also on our website, but this is still not published, so we'll keep you posted when that happens. So thank you, and I'm eager to hear your questions when we have the discussion and the opportunity. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Veronica, for this extensive presentations of the impressive results of the OMC group. I have to say this is the first time when the results are presented in Lithuania, but I am sure that we will continue the discussions based on the results and recommendations that you provided. So we will share the link that you shared with us to our audience on Facebook, and we will wait eagerly for the final report, as you promised. That will happen probably in January or in December, in a couple of weeks.
The report is out there, but the website is still in process. So the report is downloadable as a PDF from the link.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Veronica. So the questions will come later in our common discussion. And now I would like to give the floor to our next presenter, who is João Bento. He's a researcher at the Bartlett School of Planning. João is an honorary research fellow at the Bartlett School of Planning, University College London, where he researches urban design governance approaches across Europe, focused on architectural policies and informal tools of urban design governance. He participated as postdoc researcher in the international research project Urban Maestro, coordinated by UN Habitat. Previously, he developed a PhD focused on the role of national architectural policies in the European Union. In this context, João conducted a survey on architectural policies in Europe, published into a book with support from the Swedish Museum of Architecture. Graduated as an architect and urbanist from the University of Lisbon, João started his research career at the National Laboratory of Civil Engineering at Portugal. Currently, João is working as spatial urban planner at the Portuguese Environment Agency. And I know Joao for probably 15 years, and I can say that there's no bigger expert on architectural policies across Europe than he is. So I warmly welcome Joao with his presentation, the review of architectural policies in Europe. So go ahead, Joao, you can start sharing your screen and you can start your presentation.
Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank for the invitation to be here today to present some of my research findings on the ongoing development of architectural policies in Europe. I'm sharing my screen. I don't know if you're able to see it.
Yes, we see your screen, but it's not, yes, now it is fine. It's full screen mode, so you can continue.
Thank you. Well, my presentation will be divided in 5 parts. I will start by a brief overview of the emergence of architectural policies until 2001, which I call the rise of architectural policies, namely how architecture has become an object of public policy at EU level. Then I will briefly outline the main findings of a European survey on architectural policies, which I undertook in 2011 for the EFA. This will be followed by an updated panorama of the different policy approaches by the EU countries 10 years after this past research. I will then try to provide some insights on the main concepts and trends, looking across the different policy documents. And finally, I will try to give some brief conclusions on the Europeanization process of architectural policies. In the last 40 years, there has been a remarkable growth in the number of countries that have adopted official documents on architectural policy. Looking at the beginning of the movement, in the European panorama, France was the first country to adopt a national policy on architecture with the approval by the Parliament of the Law on Architecture in 1977. The adoption of the architectural law was in fact a very important milestone for the French architects, as it provided the foundation for a strong state cultural intervention based on the principle of the public interest of architecture. In the context of the Grand Projet in the 80s, it would lead to the establishment of several bodies, such as the Interministerial Mission for Quality in Public Construction in 1985, as well the creation of the Councils of Architecture and Urban Planning and the Environment, CAUE, that now exist more than 90 CAUEs around the country. In the same year, the European Council followed up this French example and adopted its first policy directly aimed to architecture, that is known the Directive of Architects in 1985. However, although the EU directive recognized the public interest of architecture, the scope of the directive was mainly restricted to the freedom and movement of architects within the EU through the mutual recognition of diplomas and other formal qualifications in architecture. In 1991, the Netherlands would adopt a pioneer policy document dedicated to architectural promotion. This new interministerial policy was an important landmark, leading to the creation of several public institutions, such as the Berlage Institute and others. Starting with this clear and forceful declaration, the Dutch policy argued that architecture and urban design were not just areas to be regulated, but they were also important cultural activities that needed to be supported. Covering the period from 1991 to 1996, this first policy was the result of a joint venture of 2 ministries, of Housing, Spatial Planning, and the Ministry of Health and Cultural Affairs. Outlining the government intention for the development of architecture as a profession and as a discipline, it would politically frame the Netherlands Architectural Institute that had been established in 1988. Since then, every 4 or 5 years, the Dutch Parliament approved a new policy version. Following this Dutch model, several other European countries started to develop comprehensive policies directly addressed to architecture and urban design. Following this trend, in 2001, the EU Council decided to adopt a EU resolution on architectural quality, encouraging the member states to promote design quality and raise awareness about the value of architecture and urban design. However, the resolution failed to embrace the emerging sustainable development agenda portrayed by the Leipzig Charter on Sustainable European Cities adopted in 2007. Therefore, in 2008, the EU Council adopted the second policy on architecture with a reinforced object and aim, the Council Conclusions on Architecture, which advocated the integration of design quality in all policies and when commissioning public works. However, like all EU soft policies, the two documents are not mandatory for the member states. They are just policy recommendations setting up general principles for future policy making. In this background, in 2011, I developed a survey together with the EFAP to review and assess the impact of the Council resolution and conclusions that I just mentioned by surveying the actions and political developments that the two EU policies may have generated in the member states since its adoption. A questionnaire was sent to governmental departments responsible by architecture within the different member states, and the report was finally published in 2012. The survey covered 33 countries, 27 member states, 4 official EU candidates, at the time Croatia was still a candidate, and 2 reference countries, Norway and Switzerland. Among other aspects, the survey tried to identify the existence of a national policy on architecture that had been formalized in some type of official document or a set of documents that could outline the government policy on architecture. As you can see on the slide, in 2011, at the time of the survey, already almost half of the countries of the European Union had some type of official architectural policy. And 14 already stated that they were planning to develop one, and only 5 were not planning to do so in something on this domain. However, after analyzing the different documents, it was identified 3 main types of policy approaches: national legislation, comprehensive policy, and sectoral policy. The comprehensive policy has been adopted by the majority of the countries, and legislation at the time only in France and Sweden, and sectoral policies only in Britain and Cyprus. If we look at the geographic distribution of the different types, this was the situation in 2011, it is possible to observe that the comprehensive policy has been adopted by the majority of the countries with the national policy on this domain. Legislation type 1 was only adopted in France and Sweden, and the sectoral approach only in southern Britain, Wales, and England and Cyprus. Probably in other countries also had this type of sectoral policies, but only these 3 had made a mention to this type of documents. In a chronological perspective, we can see that the development of formal policies on architecture is still a relatively recent phenomenon. Even so, it is possible to observe a remarkable growth in the adoption of this type of policies. About the second type, the comprehensive policy that is the most used, the survey identified these policies identified on the slide. The list does not include the documents for public discussion. It is possible to observe that after the first wave of policy documents in the last decade of the previous cycle, it led to the adoption of the resolution on architectural quality in EU Council in 2001, already referred. The number of countries with a national policy has been increasing. Just to give some examples of the countries that adopted architectural policies over the first decade of the century: Estonia, Luxembourg, Lithuania, Northern Ireland, Denmark, and Norway in 2009. Of course, some countries have reviewed their policies, as is the case of the Netherlands, that had continued the regular review of its national policy on architecture in 2005 and again in 2008. About the third type, some countries develop policies not in a unique comprehensive document policy, but in sectoral areas such as planning, or public buildings, or heritage. For the present survey, only these 3 have made a reference to them. The case of England was quite unique because the government had set up a national body just to champion good design, the old Commission for Architecture and Built Environment, that in 2011 ended up being dismissed. This previous body had produced a huge amount of guidance and recommendation, developing several informal policy tools, such as enabling initiatives, design review panels, and educational programs. Finally, the survey also described other related initiatives, such as the Baukultur reports in Germany and Austria, which were not seen as a national policy per se, but were addressing similar concerns about the built environment. So after 10 years and briefly summarizing the survey, I will try to give an overview of the current panorama of the architectural policies today. 10 years have passed, and as would be expected, new things have happened. Looking at the first type, the legislative approach, in 2017, the Catalonia government approved its first law on architecture in 2017. Although in form of legislation, the document is very similar to a comprehensive policy, as it sets out principles and goals determining the public interest in architecture, as well several measures of dissemination, awareness, and knowledge of architecture. This was also followed by the national government of Lithuania. This was followed by the national government of Spain with a public consultation on the future Spanish law on architecture. In the same year, Lithuania also approved a national law on architecture, setting and regulating the architect's profession and defining architectural quality principles and the organization of competitions. In 2018, the government of Sweden also approved a new bill entitled Policy for Design Living Environment that takes an integrative approach to the work and design living environment, which also provides a national architectural policy. And a new position has been created based after this policy, the first Sweden national architect, which will be explained by Christian Larsen in a few moments. Looking at the second type, the comprehensive policy, France, the Ministry of Culture, has announced its intention to launch its first national strategy of architecture in 2014, and then the official document was adopted at the end of 2015. In addition, 5 other countries have adopted by the first time a national policy: Croatia in 2013 and Hungary, who has adopted its policy in 2015. After a long process, Portugal has also finally approved its national policy, which has the particularity of combining architecture and landscape policy. Also, Czech Republic with its policy in 2015, and Slovenia, entitled Architecture for People. Some countries that did not have a tradition on design policies at national level, due to their federal system, have recently adopted high-quality Baukultur policies. The case of Austria, in a follow-up of several years of debating and developing Baukultur reports, the Austrian Council of Ministry adopted its first national federal guidelines on building culture, Baukultur, in 2017. More recently, in February 2020, the Swiss Federal Council formally adopted its first interparliamentary strategy for the promotion of Baukultur, arguing that to achieve a high-quality Baukultur, the federal government should set the example. The policy connects all Baukultur-related operations of the different federal offices, defining 7 strategic goals and 41 measures with aspects of public engagement, capacity building, and cooperation. Looking at the progression of the architectural policies, all 3 types together, it's possible to observe that in 2011, in the year of the survey, there was a growing tendency of the number of countries. So this is the updated situation in 2020. On the upper part, you can see Croatia, Hungary, Portugal, and Slovenia, and more recently, Czech Republic and Austria. More recently, Catalonia from Spain and Switzerland with its federal policy. Similar to Austria, Germany is also promoting several Baukultur policy initiatives. The initiative Baukultur in Architecture that started in 2000 and has also been leading the creation of the Federal Foundation for Baukultur in 2006 and has been publishing these biannual Baukultur reports. This is the latest one published last year. To add another layer, as you know, public policy is not expressed only in policy documents. Wallonia has created a specific department in charge of architecture, the cellule Architektūros. Italy has also a long general direction of contemporary architecture, as well in Spain. In 2017, the Polish government has established the National Institute of Architecture and Urban Planning, a new cultural body responsible for the dissemination and research and popularizing knowledge regarding architecture and urban planning in Poland. So, considering a broader view on public policy today, the European map of the survey that I previously shown in 2011 would look something like this. So we have more countries with a public policy. There is a special case of France, which now have a mix of policy, a law and a comprehensive policy, as well as Lithuania. I also included Germany and Switzerland with a sexual policy approach due to their Baukultur initiatives. And I included Wallonia, Italy, and Spain also has a sexual policy. Although not with the document, they are having initiatives and they have national bodies or regional bodies responsible by the same areas of competence. Finally, I also changed the title of the slide for the type of public policies on architecture, expanding the scope of the analysis. This means including not only countries that have a formal policy document, but are also implementing policy instruments, achieving or aiming for the same goals. So just to start closing my presentation, after this fast overview, I would just like to address two types of issues. First, are the national policy progressing for a European model of architectural policy? That is, despite the differences, are their main concepts, ideas, and concerns cross-national? If so, which aspects are transversal and which ones are local? And the second issue is what are the new trends and innovation across Europe? About the first aspect, comparing the different policies, it is clear that they are based on a broad notion of architecture, which encompasses not only buildings, but also public spaces and all built elements that compose human settlements. Architecture is a polysemic term and can have very different interpretations according to the context when it's being used. This semantic divide is exacerbated in context with a strong professional divide. Traditionally, architecture was mainly seen as building design, but recently it has been adopted as a broad definition where architecture constitutes a vital part of public policies, like housing and building, urban policy, environmental and landscape. In the Germanic tradition, it has been the Baukultur main concept. I will come back to that in this slide. So looking at the different policies, we can observe that the policy scope has been expanding, aiming for integration. The policy started to include other related concepts that can better convey the interdisciplinary nature of the built environment, such as spatial design in the Netherlands, place in England and Anglo-Saxon countries, and Baukultur in the Germanic states, now widely used with the Davos Declaration on Baukultur. This raises the question of whether architecture continues to be a valid concept for such holistic built environment design policy. Nevertheless, if the aim is to promote successful places, the question is not whether its name is comprehensive enough, but whether or not it has the capacity to build bridges and achieve compromises between different design professionals and stakeholders to accomplish better outcomes. All architectural policies present a common discourse that proclaims the importance of architecture for citizens' quality of life. As a consequence, the government has the responsibility to promote better quality environments. Adding to this, some policies refer that a good living environment is a constitutional right of all citizens, while others defend that developing an architectural policy will provide better coherence between such a huge amount of sectoral policies. In this sense, it is possible to identify four main arguments for the adoption of such a policy that you can see on the slide. A third issue that is similar across all the documents is that all policies aim to improve the quality of the built environment. However, design policy has an issue of public concern, involves both private and public actors, and is rooted in a wide range of causes. As such, all the policies emphasize the importance of creating a favorable climate for good design through the implementation of a diversified policy agenda. The specific way in which architectural policies intend to achieve their aims is influenced by the context in which they are produced, such as the legal and administrative traditions, cultural background of the people involved, and a particular period in time. Although the range of the policy target areas varies between the policies, it is possible to identify 6 main policy dimensions, leading by example, internationalization, urban planning, awareness and knowledge, architectural heritage, and sustainability and resilience. In general terms, the first and the fourth target area have been the backbone of all architectural policies, whereas the remaining 4 areas have been present at different degrees according with the time which they were created. For example, information and education on architecture is also one of the most common feature of the policies. Another example has been the inclusion of sustainability and resilience objective as a reaction of issues of climate change. In some policies, reuse and vacancy have become the dominant concern, replacing more traditional themes about heritage. About the new trends in the realm of architectural policies, I would like to highlight the national policies on architecture has also been adapted at regional and local levels. For example, the Nordic countries, at least some of those, have been heavily involved in the creation of traditional regional and municipal architectural policies. You can see on the slide Finland and Denmark. As my time is running out, I would just like to point out that some countries have developed specific websites to communicate their architectural policy to broader audience. For example, in Portugal, there is a specific website for the policy where everyone can follow its initiative, actions, and event. So just to finish my conclusions, my presentation, I will just give a brief conclusions on the development and progress of the policies across Europe. Looking at the empirical data, it is relevant to emphasize that in the last 30 years, there has been a remarkable growth of the number of countries developing formal policies on architecture at national and regional level. This number is increasing since the early 90s and is expected to continue to grow in the following years. Across Europe, with a very few exceptions, there is a move to a more comprehensive approach, dealing with design as a strategic national policy priority. As the benchmarking of neighbors leads to a convergence in practices, administrations that have never previously developed a comprehensive policy framework on design are now doing so. Despite a different context and concepts used, the same concerns about quality of places and quality of life are present in all of the policies and the general aim for a more sustainable development. Following these policy commitments, several countries and regions have been making very significant efforts to implement a comprehensive approach to the governance of design. To do so, some member states have established dedicated institutions or appointed a state architect team to monitor implementation action plans, often delivered through a range of informal tools for the governance of urban design. As with any policy arena, the concern for urban quality will only be delivered if properly resourced and effectively implemented. Otherwise, high-level policy statements on the value of good design will remain simply well-meaning aspiration. As was seen, more and more countries are taking architecture and design increasingly seriously and are developing sophisticated means to ensure they provide leadership on this domain. So a critical lesson is that architectural policy involves a public compromise to promote design quality as a corporative aim. To deliver this ambition across the public sector, governments should steer the direction and lead by example and fostering the place-making culture. I hope I have provided some information, valuable information for the debate, and I'm sorry for any inaccuracy on the data presented, which was based only on my web search and not on a proper survey as the previous one. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, João, for a presentation of the development of architectural policies in Europe. And I am happy to see that Lithuania was also on your scope. So later we would like to discuss the effect on the existing documents on the real grounds, not only in theory. And we are finishing with our first section of the first part. And now we are moving to the second part, which will deal with the national policies of some European countries. And well, here, unfortunately, I have to say that we have a change in our program because the first presentation should have been given by Ruth Schagemann, an architect from Germany, and she's also a newly elected president of Architects Council of Europe. But this morning I just got her message that she is down with COVID, so well, she cannot join us, but I wish her get well soon. And I think that she will share the information about German architectural policies with us later. So now I would like to invite the next speaker in our program, who is Kieran O'Connor. I can see that he's connected, but Kieran, could you confirm that you are here?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello, good morning. Very nice to see you. Are you ready to overtake the screen? We have a slight change in the program. We meet.
I see that. Yes, she's sick.
Yes, she's sick. So if you are ready, I will make a very short presentation of yourself, and then I will give a floor to you.
Okay, well, I'll set it up now.
Okay, so Kieran O'Connor. He's an Irish Institute of Architects president for 2020 and 21. In 2012, the Irish government appointed him as the new state architect and principal architect in the Office of Public Works. Kieran worked in Germany and Canada prior to joining the Office of Public Works. He is a past president of the Architectural Association of Ireland and presently a board member of the Irish Architectural Archive. Citations include 2 European Cultural Medals, the Irish Institute of Architects Triennial Medal, and 28 national awards for conservation, new build and landscape projects. He is a co-author of 7 books and is an occasional visiting lecturer, critic, competition assessor, and external examiner to schools of architecture of Ireland and abroad. So Kieran, I am very, very thankful for your participation here, and I was really very happy to see your message saying that we small countries of Europe, we have to help each other to improve our environment. So thank you very much for your friendship. And I hope that you will inspire us and our politicians and decision makers with your presentation presenting architectural policies and also the role of the state architect of Ireland. So the screen is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ruta. And just to say, I think it is very important that the smaller countries, we're very much at the periphery of Europe. And with Brexit, we are more dislocated from Europe than before. What I would like is to bring all the different elements that I have experienced that might be of benefit to you. In looking to the future. Is my first slide on the screens now?
Yes, it's perfect. You can continue.
Yeah. So I'll cover the national policy, and we're at the moment about to develop the new one, which will be published in the new year. And this builds on 2 previous policies of architecture. So the international context for us is that we are very at the edge of Europe. We're 5 million people, and we will grow by another 1 million in the next 20 years. The relationship with Europe is made more difficult because of the British withdrawal, and that has caused lots of difficulty also with the border with Northern Ireland. And let me hope that within my lifetime that is removed and we are back as one nation. But we're also conscious of the wider context of the new European Bauhaus, the sustainable development. And for instance, the Office of the State Architect is producing for the middle of next year, the government roadmap to low carbon building. So we will set an example, we hope, of the next for the next number of years in that regard. And we're happy to share that with anyone who wishes to join us on that. The policy that we have at the moment, we've had a previous one in 96, and then in 2000, and then in 2009. And there was different things done in that policy. They took various different elements. One thing we did learn on it, Ruta, is that sometimes you can have too many actions. And what I would suggest to a country like Lithuania starting, that perhaps to keep the number of objectives and actions smaller and more focused, and also very clear who does them. Everybody wanted to be involved, and that was good, but what happened was it was too spread out and too disparate, so that the first one didn't work as well as it should. One of the things to address that was that the state architect position was made in the 2009 as an idea. And as you say, then I was the first state architect in 2012, 2013. And the key then was how to make that position responsible for more actions to happen. So the State Architect Office and the Office of Public Works, what's unusual about that compared to other European countries is that it's a public practice that does work for the government, but also has to account for itself financially. So this is a project I would have done 25 years ago, 20 years ago when I first joined OPW. So we would be working at national monuments, government buildings. We would have 2,400 buildings to look after. So, and many of the projects have been published in different places. So it's an unusual situation, but it's unusual positive in that public practice and private practice work well together. And we would give out as much work as is done internally, and that helps set standards and protect the architecture profession, which is important as well. So it does many different things. And to support that element, we look at the European policy elements, and they're the different ones. I won't go into all the detail there, but research is one that we're developing now, and we're developing that with all the schools of architecture. And that policy of research will now be formalized and structured, which it wasn't up to this year. So that's an element that from the Institute of Architects point of view, in my job there as president, was to bring that in, and also reform of the education process. So there will be a complete change in certain ways of training architects, keeping the positives and building on areas that need to be built on. And that will come into action next May for the next 5 years. The plus that the Institute of Architects in Ireland have is they are the representative body for the profession, but they also are the registration body under the European rules. And that is a very significant and positive thing to have. Whereas if you look at some other countries where they aren't a representative registration body, then that makes it more difficult to influence. And it has been very positive that I, as state architect and as the president of the Institute, that has given us some unique ways to improve things. And I have to be, of course, very careful I have a job, what I call my day job to do, and then I have to do my evening and weekend job as president of the Institute. But I have found I have done that in a way that the political people don't see that as just representing architects, it taking the wider public view. So all of those things of exhibitions and publications are very important. Yeah. And to promote excellence. Now, this is always a difficulty. How do you do that? So in our office here, we run a graduate training program for 3 years, and we train 30 architects who have finished their studies to become fully professional. And we have done that for a number of years, and it has had a very positive element. And also this office would have helped set up one of the colleges of architecture a number of years ago, where we felt there was a gap in the training of architects. And the quality of architecture in Ireland, you would maybe hear that the Pritzker Prize was run by an Irish practice 2 years ago. And the Sterling Award in Britain was won by an Irish practice late last year. So the standard is good, but what I'm concerned of is also when you think you're at your best is the time you need to watch the most careful and plan for the future. So we've been planning that this doesn't dip and that it continues to improve. And the optimization of that role, I know maybe in a country like Lithuania, where you've come out from under the Soviet Union, the aspect of state, the word state may have connotations that are not positive. Luckily, that isn't the case here. And I can understand that. But what I would suggest, it is an important role, not just because I happen to occupy it. It is an important role, I think, for the country, for that the aspects of the built environment are given due consideration, as well as the economic elements, and that the quality elements, which are always the hardest to talk about and deliver, is also considered. So it's not just an economic view of the world. And that synergy and sharing experience, and what I call the watermark of excellence, that it's inherent in what you do. And that as an architect and landscape architect, I think that's very important. And like Lithuania, we have a very beautiful landscape, and we need to take care of that as well. And how do you do that? In delivering of budgets and stuff, politically, people want things on time and on cost, and that has to be the case. It cannot be just, well, we'll see if that happens. There's no reason why the quality on time and on budget cannot be happened. It's a matter of arranging that to be. So there's different programs of work that would show you all the different things we as the state do. We have a series that would be of interest maybe to you, whereby in the initial stages, we have frameworks which allows a small practice to start doing work for the government, and then they can go to a medium-sized system and then to the major size. So it can be like a stepping stone for practices to develop their skill base. And we also encourage joint ventures between smaller practices and bigger practices for competitions that we will run. So we try to integrate those databases and knowledge management as well, and that aspect of adding value, and that the value is economic but also cultural, and that how do you evaluate culture? And that is a big issue. And I have been talking with our Ministry of Finance to say we have to find a way of valuing the culture, and the whole aspect of life cycle costing. We're now bringing that in for all public projects, and the carbon footprint for its lifetime. The graduate training program I mentioned to you, we've been running, the office has been running that, and now it's run jointly by the Institute of Architects and here, and you can see there's over 110 architects have gone through that process. And we've lucky that they have done very well. They've won the medal for first place on 4 occasions, and they've been very well placed since then. And we've never had a failure, even though the pass rate would be maybe 85%. So all of those are very important, and we take that very carefully and seriously. And we do tie into the colleges, and many of my colleagues, I offer them and make them available to the colleges for critiques of students' work and advice and mentoring. And we, all of us here of the senior people, mentor students and young architects as part of a process agreed with the Institute of Architects. And the national policy, that sets out all those different things you can see there: compact, sustainable growth, low carbon, quality. We have a housing shortage in Ireland because of the financial crash in 2008 and the growing population, and that needs to be matched and done. And also the reuse of existing buildings is becoming very important, and the biodiversity. And being a landscape architect as well as an architect, I'm very keen that biodiversity. So is our projects in our office, we do an audit, which is like a check at the different steps of sketch scheme, planning permission, tender, whereby we check compliance with a green agenda and biodiversity. So projects do not get approved unless they meet those requirements. And that new policy that's coming is now supporting for the country for the future. It's talking about quality and long-term planning strategies. And the way we've structured it is in this way. So you have the vision and the clear alignment of that. You make it into a number of objectives, and in this case, we've made it into 4. And I mentioned about actions. We have about 20 actions, whereas before we had 44. And what we want to do is that over the next number of years, that those actions all be accounted for and different people made responsible for them. And then how that would be related within governance and the principles of economic and cultural standards is also part of that. And that policy vision is there. It promotes the power of architecture and design to bring about a more sustainable society through leadership, creativity, and communication, and accessibility for all. And that project there in front of you is the reuse of an old school from 1880 and a new courthouse behind it. And the new old school has been made part of the new courthouse, and thereby continuing on a tradition over many years. And that policy has 4 high-level objectives: sustainability, design quality, leadership, and that's where the state architect element comes in, the leadership to be given and how to make that happen in the future, and cultural awareness of architecture as both an art and a science that adds value. The draft action areas are to support green public procurement. There's different guidelines established. The energy upgrading of buildings, we have a massive amount of that to do in Ireland. We have some very poorly insulated houses that need to be improved. And then what we also want to do is the national data sets in relation to sustainability. And what we mean there is a proper and agreed way of how to measure that and how to account for it. And the second one is design quality and spaces for everyone. And there's an element of a formal and informal education program. There's fund initiatives in response to emerging issues, like, for instance, research, as I mentioned, and we signed an agreement now with the different colleges about research program, and providing advice on quality, sustainability, and universality, which is like diversity of people. And then to promote master planning as part of a process that architects are involved in, not just planners. And objective 3 is advocating for that leadership. And the draft action areas are innovation and research. And we're talking to the universities there, and we're also talking to practice. Improved cooperation between sectors, and I always call this, you need to have a willing grouping of people to do it. And architects often aren't always the most cooperative with each other. They can be quite independent-minded, and that's fine, but they also have to be collective-minded, I think. And they need to do that for 2 reasons. One, to support their profession, but secondly, that is where the future is. It's not saying, I'm the only person who can do something. The aspects of procurement are important, because if you let the EU Brussels rules be interpreted only in a legalistic way, that would not be positive for procurement. So we try to make changes to that. It's one of the most difficult areas we have come across. The aspect of the role of the state architect has been agreed now that shall be enhanced and made greater. And that's, I think, a positive step. And also that local authority, which is local government, architects' access would happen in the rest of the country. So not just around the capital or the main cities. And the 4th objective was awareness, and then the foster culture, which is like Finland would have a culture of architecture, so would Denmark. A number of countries have that culture inherent in them, and what we want to do is to establish that here. Traditionally, Ireland was very strong on literature, and we've produced many good Nobel Prize winners for writing, but we also are a visual culture, and how to develop that through research and partnerships and the data. And previous policies, we looked at that and we saw what the strengths and weaknesses of it. And that's why I mentioned maybe to have less number of actions and clearer responsibility. And then various things were discussed about, like documents that are made that we do and give to government, as well as talk among our own institute. And public consultation was done on this particular policy, and there was many different submissions. The trick here is that you get many submissions of people talking about style, but I always say back, it's got to do with content. It's not just about style. Stylistic elements can be a distraction. Really, it's the quality, and we shouldn't get ourselves lost in stylistic arguments. It's a qualitative argument. And the review of those submissions has now completed. And 4 weeks ago, all the government departments were given 2 weeks to respond to the draft policy, and they have done so. And so next week, it goes before the government to be agreed as a policy for them for publication in the new year. So I'm happy that we've got it through to a situation, in a difficult situation like the pandemic, that we managed to keep the focus and make it happen. So I'm looking forward to now seeing that next year. And then just what might I leave you with? And I thought to leave you something with your own language, because us, our small country, have our own language too. But the role of the government policy on architecture and the state architect, I believe, is to be center of an architectural compass, a fulcrum to the push and pull of political, economic, and cultural demands, while offering the citizen center of services encompassing 360 degrees. And I think in the situation where you interface between government, culture, and a great tradition of architecture, it is important to have that element, and that architects need to understand it is a compass, and that at certain times it'll be pulled in one direction and later in another direction. But in the end, it must balance those three things: political, economic, and cultural. And that's where the future, I think, from my years of experience of dealing with it here, and as I've said before, we would be more than happy to help in any way possible with colleagues from countries who have come from a background not dissimilar to ourselves, occupied for many years by others, and now have come free and want to chart their own future. So we look forward to playing a positive role with the European Bauhaus, but also with individual countries. And we've worked with many other countries in the past, and we look forward to that in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kieran, and I wish you all the success for the next weeks in the government, confirming your architectural policy. I am sure that it will be a positive result, and thank you very much for invitation to ask for some advice and help in the future. I am sure that we will do that, so we will meet in other formats as well. And the questions about your presentation will come later in our common discussion. So thank you very much. And I would like to invite the next speaker of the conference to present a national policy of architecture in Sweden. So Christer Larsson is a former director of city planning in Malmö and professor in architecture. He's a commissioner in the Commission for a Socially Sustainable Malmö. He's a member of the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences. He's an honorary academician at the Academy of Urbanism. He's a member of governing board INTA and senior advisor to Global Challenge. Also, he's a founder of Helastaden. He's appointed by the Swedish government to propose a new national policy for architecture, form and design, designed living environment, adopted by the Swedish Parliament in 2008. He's appointed by the Swedish government as national architect in 2018. He's appointed by the Swedish government as expert in the committee of a new national policy for housing. Also, Christer is a winner of various awards, such as the City Planner of the Year in 2019, such as the Swedish Architects Prize for Planning and the Prize for Urban Leadership from the Royal Academy of Fine Art. So I am happy to invite you, Christer. The screen is yours. You can start your presentation.
Thank you so much. Hopefully you will see my screen now, do you?
Yes, everything works. Go ahead.
Very good. Thank you so much. And thank you for the kind presentation, I will say, in the beginning, and also for having me into this important conference. It's really interesting to listen to all the colleagues presenting their work. And I think there is something going on really in the architectural field in Europe today. And I'm really looking forward to that. I will give you some idea about my philosophy which I have developed during a period of 20 years time now, working with the city of Malmö, working with the transformation of the city. And I think that's been quite important for me as a practitioner, both from 20 years in the private sector and 20 years as a civil servant in the municipality. So my background in Malmö is to transform this old industrial city to a more modern city that we have today. And this is very much a question of political leadership. And I would say that if we don't have a good political leadership, nothing will happen. So we have a mayor in Malmö, also trained as an architect, that led this process with a very good vision for the city to transform after the collapse of the economy, when we lost 30,000 job places just in a couple of years. And architecture has been a very important part of that transformation. But I will really underline what Kieran said about style. It's absolutely not a matter of style, it's a matter of content. I really agree with that. So when I had all these proposals from different architects, it was important for me to understand what will this object play for role in the city as a whole. So coming from prototyping in the Western Harbour, for example, I always work with the city as a whole, including all the environmental and social aspects, which is really crucial for me as a practitioner. So architecture and sustainability has been keywords for us when we have worked with the transformation of the city. We have been very true to the Brundtland Commission when that was launched. And today we are working with the SDGs, and I will come back to that. I think they are very, very good, and especially leaving no one behind. I really like that. So for me, it's a question of values, both creating values, but also having values as a mindset. What kind of values will be created in the city as a whole? And in the municipalities, you have different tools for that. You can have a local architecture policy, you have the environmental policy, you have a comprehensive plan, and so on. And work with this, all documents in a coordinated way will be a success factor, I think. But still, we can see that we are consuming too much, and it's both energy, land, transportation, and so on. We have societal differences, especially in health and welfare, and we have economical models that really don't fit into the way we will work today. On the right side, you can see Closing the Gap in a Generation, which is the global report concerning health. We did one in Malmö on the local city level as well. And it's so interesting to see how you can use differences in health, for example, to interpret that into a spatial structure. So today I see words like inclusive, accessible, sustainable, and also justice, democracy, and long-term perspective. I'm quite convinced that you can embed questions in the spatial processes like democracy, participation, empowering, and so on. So that's why I'm a strong believer in the power of architecture and into the 17 SDGs as a way of managing these questions in the municipality level. So in Sweden, we have some initiatives now. We are adopting the Agenda 2030. We have given the Convention of the Children as a law. We have an Equality Commission. We have a new housing policy, and since some years also the National Architecture Policy. So this is the way of how I am thinking about architecture, and sometimes I feel like a priest when I'm out telling people about this, but I think you understand. So when I was commissioned by the Minister of Culture, and in fact it was 5 ministries working with the new policy, and it was the Minister for Environment, Culture, Education, Finance, and Trade and Industry. So it was really a broad perspective that has to be considered when I worked with the new proposal. So I was in fact hesitating to do the job, but when the minister presented the way of she's thought about architecture, I mean the holistic perspective, the social perspective, health and democracy, that was very much how I thought about architecture. So I said, yes, I would try to do it. And the ambition was quite high from the minister, and hopefully in some meaning I fulfilled this. So the minister also saw that the field of architecture and planning has moved to another position compared to the existing policy that we already had. And I took out some illustrations from the old policy, and this is what you see here. And that's something quite different to how we are looking upon architecture today, content. So for me, architecture is a tool, and it must be related to the challenges that we have in the society. And we must look upon architecture as a part of the solution. So, I mean, every challenge that you have has also a spatial interpretation, and that's important to know. So it's mainly what it makes that's important for me. And in the world today, you can see, I mean, it's so fascinating to visiting the biennales because they are so good. And the global trends, they are local, and the connections between global and local questions. And for me, and I think I haven't said this 10 years ago, but today I say that urban planning is a process for strengthening the citizen's ability, the ability to be a good citizen, to be a part of the democratic system, and so on and so on. So, I mean, it matters how we are organizing the spatial structures, because everything has to have a space. Even it's an electrical cable or a bus or a human, it has to have a space. And it's important to remember that. So when I wrote the proposal, I introduced this as a perspective, and this perspective to have this as an instrument, but also putting the people in the center. And you have seen this many times before, but have people in focus, to be related to the challenges, to continuously being revised, to be adequate. And the region, I also propose some regional nodes in the country as a whole, and also the national architect, and new research programs, and also in all instructions and directives to governmental institutions, having the perspective architecture here. So, as I said, I thought about this as a system. There was a governmental level, it was the public sector level, the industry, and also, not at least, knowledge building and the academics, and many, many other things. So it was adopted by the Parliament 2018. And that's quite unique that a policy like this is adopted by the Parliament. Normally, I think it's adopted by the government, but this is the Parliament. So that's a very, very strong statement for the politicians. You can find it on the internet. The summary looks like this. I can send you the links later on. But the main goal is that architecture and design will help to create a sustainable, equitable, and less segregated society, and a design living environment which everyone is placed to influence the development for the environment. So I think this is a quite important aspect or important goal. And sorry, something happened here. So, and there are some goals beneath that, and that is that sustainability and quality are not made subversive to short-term financial considerations. That's quite easy to say and difficult to do. And the knowledge in the field of architecture should develop and be disseminated. The public sector acts as a role model. Aesthetics, cultural assets are preserved, and environment are designed to be accessible for all. I mean, it's quite familiar to what Karen said with the Irish. So it's and the governmental level, it's mandatory for the public sector. All institutions owned by the government or managed by the government, it's mandatory for them. And it's the policy is advisory for the municipalities, and the national architect, for example, are supporting the different kind of tools. So the national architects, it's Helena Bjarnegård today. I was the first one for half a year only, but we had to recruit the final national architect. So that's Helena Bjarnegård, saw her on picture earlier. So her role is to promote different governmental agencies, to guide the municipalities, and so on and so on. It's a quite important work. And one of the most important is that she is also the chairman of this committee, where we have all the important governmental organizations for funding, research, and so on. And you can see Architeks, which is the former Architecture Museum, which is now named as the Swedish Center for Architecture and Design. Together with this, she is promoting the municipalities to have local policies as well. And this is the local policy for us in Malmö. And there's 9 theses about architecture, we named them. So also in the global aspect, we have at the Global Challenge worked with the toolkit, Her City. And I think it's quite interesting to see how all these things are fitted together. And not at least the last years during the pandemics, I think we have seen a lot of interesting things there, and we, in some meaning, have been thrown into the future, and we have new lifestyles and new tendencies, and we are not really aware how this should end. And I think this is so interesting, and what will be the role of the policy, and what is the new urban brief. I was to a conference in Great Britain for a while, and everyone talked about this. What is the new urban brief? And that's something that we have to find out. And one important tool here is the national policy. So also to remember, this is nothing that could be done by one person, even if I think it's important to have a national architect with a mandate to doing things. But it is a way of working together. That's quite important, I think. And at the end, Alvar Aalto, a quite well-known architect, he said that the ultimate goal for the architect is to create a paradise. And hopefully we can do that if we are working coordinated in all levels from the European Bauhaus. That's so interesting that we heard about earlier this day. The new European Bauhaus, national policies, and also policies for the academic and for the municipalities. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Christer, for your inspiring presentation. I think that we've got the draft name for our future architecture policy. It should be Towards a Paradise.
Hopefully.
And with the next presentation, we don't move very much far away from Sweden, because the next presentation will talk about Finland. And I am happy to present two colleagues from Finland, who are Eva Astala. She's an Arch-Info Finland social advocacy expert focusing on projects that strengthen the position and importance of architecture in society, such as promoting the architectural policy programs. Arch-Info Finland is one of the 8 information centers of art supported by the Ministry of Education and Culture of Finland. And also her colleague Mika Savela, who works as arts advisor in architecture at the Arts Promotion Center Finland, one of the government agencies in charge of implementing the new architectural policy in Finland, as well as advancing the role of art, architecture, and design in the society. So, dear colleagues, the screen is yours. Share it according to your wishes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ruta. And hello, everybody. Nice to be here. As Ruta really nicely presented us, my name is Eva Astala, and I'm from Arch-Info Finland, and we're together here with Mika Savela from Arts Promotion Center Finland. And I will start the presentation, and then Mika will take it from there. Just a moment. Yes. Seems to be working.
Yes.
Okay, great. Ruta, you really nicely introduced us. I will just say a few words more on that, and then we'll talk about the Finnish architectural policy program draft and its implementation. I work as a social advocacy expert here at Arch-Info Finland, and we aim to make Finnish architecture visible and known, both, of course, here in Finland and abroad. And advocating and implementing architectural policies is one of our focus areas and really important issue for us. We also acted as the secretary to the working group that made the proposal for the new architectural policy program, which we'll dive into in just a moment. And here with me today is architect and PhD Mika Savela from Arts Promotion Center Finland. And the Arts Promotion Center Finland, also known as Taike in Finnish, is a public funding agency providing expertise and services for the arts under the Ministry of Education and Culture. And its role is similar to, let's say, the art councils in some other European countries. And the agency will be also coordinating some of the key responsibilities in the implementation of the new program, such as providing guidance to local level policies and networks, as well as promoting the artistic and cultural aspects of architecture within the program. And the agency is also one of the Finnish partners in the Davos Declaration process. So for us here in Finland and for Mika and myself, these are really exciting times at the moment, since the new policy program is being finalized as we speak and will be out in the beginning of next year. And the previous architectural policy program for Finland is from 1998. So it's been a long time coming, and as I mentioned, these are really exciting times for us. Mika and I, amongst, of course, a really wide network of actors from all sectors and agencies will be really strongly involved in the implementation and promotion of this new program. And this is also why it is great to be here today. So it's been finalized, the program, and then we'll just take it from there and see what happens next. So I'll be presenting the proposal and its process, and then Mika will talk more about the implementation of the finalized program. So a working group for the new policy program was set up a year and a half ago by both the Ministry of Education and Culture and the Ministry of Environment. And the working group is was a large group of experts that brought a wide range of expertise from all aspects of the built environment to the table. So there were representatives from business sector to education to cultural heritage, you name it. Other stakeholders, besides the working group, were involved in the process in different ways, including several structured workshops in 2019 and 2020. And the proposal for the new architectural policy program was submitted in the beginning of this year. So the program proposal consists of 5 chapters, and the chapters discuss then the different dimensions of sustainable development, as well as education and research. It is both a strategic and a practical program with its visions, and then the action points with the responsible parties for the implementation mentioned in each action point. Some new interesting openings, at least in my opinion, include introducing the concept of baukulttuur, so the building culture, to the Finnish discussion, and the proposal for a new notion or concept of architectural sustainability, which highlights sort of the immaterial qualities of architecture and is based on the Davos Declaration and the high quality baukulttuur. Then, should I say the framework of the proposal is built on the idea that while architecture has to, of course, adapt and respond to the great challenges of our time, it is also seen, architecture is seen as an active player in making the change for the better. So I think this is quite similar to what Krister and Kiaran just presented, that architecture is a solution also to some great issues of our time. And another sort of concept or notion that is mentioned in the proposal is the handprint of architecture that describes these positive effects that architecture has on all its users, so both human and non-human. So the proposal for the new architectural policy program was sent for comments in the beginning of this year. And after that, the ministries also carried out a co-operational process with the group of hand-picked academic researchers in order to sort of evaluate the proposal and then enhance the impact of the final policy program. And I think this academic research cooperation was found really fruitful. And the researchers pointed out some examples and suggested some improvements, including enhancing the bottom-up approach and participation of the civil society. Also, questions related to biodiversity should be given more emphasis, And then the group also proposed more clear linkages to the international documents, such as the Davos Declaration, the new European Bauhaus Initiative, etc. And also the point of view of children and young people was suggested to be brought more clearly into the program. So, and from the basis of all of this, so the 70-ish comments and the academic cooperation, the new architectural policy program is being finalized as we speak and will be published in the beginning of next year. And it will be translated also to at least Swedish and English. So we will be then handing you over all the copies in the right languages. Right, that's it for me. Then Mika will take it from here and talk more about the implementation of this finalized policy program. But on my behalf, thank you so much. Mika.
Thank you, Eva. I wonder if for practical reasons, should we switch the screen sharing?
Sure.
Eva,
yeah.
you have to stop your screen sharing and then Mika can switch on.
Yeah. Yes.
Just a minute. Okay. Is it back on the sharing?
Yes, everything is perfect.
Okay, great. So just to continue where Eva left us, I think like one of the assignments in a way for Eva and her organization and me at the Arts Promotion Center and also all the other actors is this situation where we kind of find ourselves on this level of sort of implementation, that we're now going to have this new program, and it's been a while, you know, like the world has changed drastically, and our understanding of what these kind of policies should be talking about, they're very different in, you know, in the late 90s when the previous Finnish program was published. And was published very successfully and had a very huge impact, and probably even still has on the sort of governmental or governance, and so this kind of like a list of things that you see here that is so common, I guess, in many strategies and many papers, policy papers, like what all kinds of things we now need to take into account when speaking about architectural policy. And here on the right side, you see these topics that were specified when this program work was starting. And now we're in this phase where we kind of have to understand that everything is everything, that we have a huge number of experts, and also the different disciplines have such a kind of like a new way of thinking of the world, and no one can be an expert in everything. So what is really the role of the architectural policy is one of the questions that we do face. So I'm coming at this from a very sort of practical point of view. And for this presentation, we thought that we would lift like three things from the implementation that we see that will be very important when working ahead. And I would say that, so unlike, let's say, the examples from Ireland and from Sweden, Finland does not have a kind of a singular centralized existing governmental actor or body or a post or vacancy for architectural policy work. So our model will, in any case, happen, how the work will progress in some sort of a coordinated network. We're also facing a situation where some of the forms of regional governance has changed. We have a new legislation updated on various things, on environmental policies, on land use, on everything. And we have also like new generations of leaders of different institutions. And so we are facing in a bit of a like a situation with architectural policy that where we left things 20 years ago, also the structure where we should operate and work with the program has changed. And there are way more players in the field, I would say, that there has been in the past. So one of the things that will be the first thing that where the implementation goes is that we need to draft a kind of like a plan on what we're going to, how we're going to build this network so that it will be everyone's included, but also that it will be effective way to start working. So we need to reestablish this network that we will work with. Another, I think, a sort of a specialty of the Finnish policy is that we have this kind of a very strong planning apparatus in the country. So there are sort of different levels of regional government and authorities, and also the municipalities have a very big role in the planning and land use and overall development of regions. So that means that that in different parts of the country, much different, very different kind of like realities are faced. Finland is a country that is quite sparsely populated, especially in the northern regions. I mean, not unlike Sweden, obviously. And of course, many countries face this thing that there are shrinking regions and there are growing regions. So this sort of national policy has to cater for everyone. And one of the, as I said, the specialties is that that we've sort of in the past put focus on this local policy level work. Currently, there are around 25 local policy, architectural policy programs for cities, for regions, and we hope to increase this amount to new heights, but also find a way that what would be, it might not be for everyone, for every small region to kind of build their own program. Maybe there will be some sort of a system that we engage with them, providing information, bring experts to them, and organize things as well. So while we hope for new local level programs to emerge and be updated, we also want to start a process, and that will be one of my tasks, is to how can we sort of build up some sort of a handbook or a manual for these local level policies, or the work, basically. This is also included in the idea of building or expanding a sort of a regional architect activities as these vacancies are now planned. A third thing that perhaps was also mentioned in the previous presentation is that ultimately we also understand that this is a single policy paper trying to say everything about everything, and while it has to and tries to follow somehow the line of thinking that what architecture can do and what planning can do and what design can give into these challenges we face, it is still a single policy paper. So without this network or without these local policies, none of this is going to really have much impact. So we are hoping that this, instead of becoming a kind of a sort of a standard that we every 20 years, if we have the opportunity to update the program, we would instead start thinking about this as a living document, something that can also shift focus and even before the next cycle is approaching. Currently, we see that the next policy program would be maybe launched at every 10 years or so. So 2030 is perhaps the next time window for that. But in the meantime, this policy network, the work that goes on and in these local levels and is seen as the most important thing to build up and to make that more sustainable. We have great hope in this because there is a kind of like everyone seems to be expecting the new program, and it is highly anticipated in the, especially in the regional governments, because for them these kinds of policies provide some guidance and some sort of a something they can rely on as they kind of have to negotiate what goes on in the local development in cities and municipalities. But this also has to be a kind of a thing that where everyone is involved. So as a kind of a final slide here, we want to see that architectural policy could become a much more of an ongoing discourse. So we have a lot of operators in the field, and the policy itself, the policy conversation, the policy network, the policy events have to be this sort of an ongoing discourse. We also hope that it will become an arena for visibility, for representation, not just for, you know, obviously members of the civil society, and so that each group and every one has a seat at the table and having their voices heard, but also that these regional sort of incoherencies and in terms of development or like opportunities can be more equal, so that national level architectural policymakers hear and learn from their regional counterparts. We also see that this should be a professional program, but also a public program. So that is why, like, some parts of, let's say, Archinfo's wherever works has a direct link to communicating with the public. But then again, professionals are really key in the implementation as well. And finally, the Baukultur and all this sort of European level context, we feel that architectural policy for us, because the timing is so kind of perfect for that so much is happening on the EU level currently, that this is the place also where we have to sort of domesticate the concepts of Baukultur and the sort of rakennuskulttuuri in Finnish, like building culture, so that we translate the words, we start to speak the language, we kind of like think to ourselves, what does that mean here? What parts of this process are good as they are, and where we need to develop. So that is basically the presentation from us. The new program will come out in a bit of a different format throughout the year. First, we will finish the sort of more official program that comes in the Finnish government publishing series. Then there will be some more sort of like less informative but more communicative forms of spreading this. And to follow up, there is the link to the Archinfo's dedicated page. But I will end my presentation here, and thanks on my behalf, and Eva as well, probably.
Thank you very much, Mika and Eva, for a very comprehensive analysis of the process of architecture policy making, because I think it's also very important for the success of the document. And now we will move to the last participant of this conference, Christian Boret. He's a Baumeister, Maître Architect of Brussels Capital Region since 2015. He previously held the same position in Antwerp in 2006-2014 and is currently also working for the city of Amsterdam as supervisor for two major urban transformation areas, Oostenburg and Hammerkwartier. Christian Boret is professor of urban design at Ghent University since 2005. And I also can add that he was one of the leaders of a fantastic project, Urban Maestro, that was addressing the quality of urban design and processes of getting to the quality urban environment. So Christian Boret, the screen is yours. You can start your presentation.
Thank you, Ruta, for the nice introduction. And from my side as well, hello to all of you. I'll share my screen. Just 1 moment. Do you have a full screen image or not?
No, we have not the full screen image. We can see your slides, but we can also see.
Okay, I'll try once more, and it will work now.
Yes, now it's perfect.
I would like to start perhaps with a kind of a more personal anecdote. So in in 91, I was a student. And I was doing a master course in Barcelona, and that was 91. That means 1 year before the start of the Olympic Games in Barcelona. And so that was a wonderful period because it was also after the Franco years. And so the city was opening up in all ways, politically, socially, but also on the level of architecture and urban planning. And so lots of things were changing there. So there was really a new vague wave of projects, bringing also Barcelona back to the sea. So here the project of Manuel de Soler Morales for the Mall de la Fusta in front of the harbor. And that's where I learned that in a city, you need, of course, a policy, you need planning recommendations, you need a good building permit system and so on. You need the hard stuff, but you also need something else in order to have real quality, excellent quality. If you want to go for excellence in urban design, then you need something more. And that's something more that is less tangible. It's less hard. In the case of Barcelona, it was a very good urban planner, Oriol Bohigas, who was very close to politics. It was a mayor who was interested in architecture. It was a whole series of fine architects that were knowing each other, that were challenging each other. There was a kind of competition that was good competition in the sense of emulation. There was a kind of general culture on architecture and urban planning. So it was discussed in the newspapers and so on. So to be short, there was a climate in favor of quality architecture and quality urban design. And so that's for me a big lesson. So you need both things. You need a good basis, which is the legislative basis, but then you need also, if you want real excellent quality, you need something else. And so my plea would be to Lithuania to work on the basis, of course, but to keep in mind that you need also something else and that you can provide this something else, that kind of opportunities, also as Veronica has been saying, also opportunities for people, that you can create that you can build that within that legislative basis. So it's important to anticipate. Then I would like to explain a bit what is this about bouwmeesters or maître architecte, because it's not exactly the same thing as a city architecture or state architect in Belgium. So it's a kind of Belgian invention, you could say, quite recent. So we were inspired by the function of a bouwmeester in the Netherlands, which is existing since the 19th century, but we adopted it and reinterpreted it, and I think we made it more interesting than in the Netherlands, because they're looking to us now. You know, you have this kind of rivalry between especially Dutch-speaking part of Belgium and the Netherlands. So in Belgium, in the north part of Belgium, in Flanders, and in the city of Antwerp, the bouwmeester was already introduced in something like 2000. Then it was also introduced in Brussels in 2009. Then in 2013 in French-speaking part of Belgium, in the city of Charleroi. Quite recently also in the city of Ghent, a really medium-scale city, something like 150,000 inhabitants, medium scale on the level of Belgium. And then it was announced last year to be introduced in the French-speaking part of Belgium, in Wallonia, but it has not yet been realized, so we are waiting. So that means if Wallonia follows, that Belgium is in fact more or less covered, that you have a kind of quite consistent system of bouwmeesters in every city and every region, even if the function is always slightly different, depending on the city, depending on the region, but the spirit is the same. So what is a bouwmeester? A bouwmeester, in the first place, it is not the head of the planning administration, for instance, in the case of Brussels. It is, of course, also not the manager or the designer of the public buildings. So it was like that before. So the bouwmeester was the one who was designing the schools of the city. It's not anymore like this. I'm also not responsible for the final decision on the planning permits. So in that sense, it is not exactly like the chief city architect in many cities, because the chief city architect is really part of the administration. On the other hand, I'm also not just a consultant, one of many consultants, and I'm also not a politician. So what is the bouwmeester exactly? You could resume it in one sentence. The bouwmeester met architect promotes special quality in urban development projects in Brussels from an independent position. If we deconstruct now this sentence, so first aspect is to promote. That can take many forms. It's about controlling, it's about convincing, but it's also about raising awareness and about initiating. But what is in fact most crucial is that one has to be able to act as early as possible. If you want to work on improving the quality of architecture, the more early you have the opportunity to be involved, the more better the chances are that there will be some real quality at the end of the trip. So that's really an early, being early is quite important. It's about urban development. That means not just architecture, it's also about the quality of public spaces, the quality of landscape, the quality of road infrastructure, and so on. I think we all share also that quality, of course, is not just about aesthetics. It's about much more fundamental things like sustainability, but also contributing to the good functioning of public space, integration in the urban fabric. These are all more objective than subjective judgments. So in many cases, people think working about quality of architecture is about taste or good taste and so on. I strongly believe that there are a lot of objective criteria that are important in judging the quality of architecture and urban design. I think the Bouwcultuur report or the set of 8 criteria helps a lot there as well. It's in Brussels, so we are working on the territory of Brussels Capital Region. It's a region, but it's in fact a city region, so it's a big city. And it's both public and private clients. And the most important thing, and that makes the distinction with a lot of other city architects' jobs, is that the bouwmeester is really in an independent position. So the bouwmeester is appointed by the government, but can be critical to the government. So you need a government who dares to do that, to pay someone to be even probably also critical. But then the bouwmeester is neutral, and that is not belonging to one of the pillars of the organization of the government or of the city or of the city administration. That means because you're not belonging to one of the pillars, you can more easily work in a transversal way. You're not considered to be one of the other ones. Because you don't belong to nobody, you can work with anybody. And so I think also this kind of transversal aspect is very much important in dealing with quality today. Quality and urban issues are wicked problems. They are involving a lot of competences and so on and dimensions. So it's important, if you want to go for quality, that you try to work in a transversal, horizontal way. To give you some final, more practical information, so a bouwmeester is the full-time job. He's appointed, he or she is appointed per term of 5 years. So maximum 2 terms in one city is more or less the normal thing. And then you have to move. There is an open call for applications. There is a selection procedure that is totally transparent. The bouwmeester has to make a policy note that is approved or adopted by the government. The job is integrated within the administration, but directly accountable to the government. And everything is financed by the government. So the bouwmeester is working free. From time to time, I'm saying we instead of me. That's because we are a team. There's a team of more or less 15 people who are integrated within the administration, but also working in that kind of independent way. So the bouwmeester is really something that is in and out of the system. That kind of hybrid position is quite important. And as in many cities, there are a lot of other organisms or institutions working on architecture, working on quality. So there is an entire network. That is in Brussels even more complicated perhaps than in other cities. You know that Belgium is a country that is organized in a complicated way. So what do we do? What are the tools? And so many of those tools, they go beyond planning legislation. They go beyond regulation. They put something on top in order to search for excellence in architectural quality. So the bouwmeester organizes is in fact Brussels, the central place where competitions are organized. That goes as well for the public procurement procedures of the government and of the municipalities in Brussels, but also, for instance, for private developers. So I'm organizing regularly an architecture competition with private developers. So we're launching big ones and small ones, all kinds of competitions. So more or less 1 competition a week. So it's quite a steep rhythm. There is a whole set of requirements on the way that we want competitions to be organized. So competitions should be organized in a proper way. For instance, the program has to be clear, the budget has to be clear and is checked on beforehand. There is never a competition on the fee of the architect. So the fee is fixed. So there's always a 2-step process. First candidates, and then something like 3 to 5 architects are selected to propose a project. And they're also paid for making that project. The call for applications or for candidates is always totally public, so no shortlist system. Low access criteria in order to open the competitions also to young architects. I think the open call of the Vlaams Bouwmeester has been mentioned, for instance. So in Belgium, there's quite now a kind of system mechanism, a culture of organizing competitions that are quite open and that help also young architects to move up and to have bigger projects. Open presentations, jury is totally focused on quality and there is a lot of transparency. So the jury decisions and the kind of report on the results of the competitions are always published on the sites of several bouwmeesters. A second tool is research by design. So in my team, I have 4 people who are making projects, who are designing, or producing images and maps. So the idea is not to have something built in the way that we have designed it. No, the idea is to feed the debate on quality, and to feed the debate on quality with our tools as architects, and that is a model, an image, a map. Because too often I can see that in discussions with politicians on, for instance, major urban projects, there are Word documents describing what should happen. There are Excel documents describing what the rentability should be, or everything about the square meters. But what is lacking is an image or a design, a kind of imagination of how the project could look like and what the impact would be on the neighborhood. So I'm talking about the very beginning of the definition of a project, of course, when these kind of decisions on the political level are being made. And so we can see that it really helps to feed that debate also with images, sometimes in the negative sense. And so I remember that they all agreed on a project that should bring 30,000 square meters, because that means that much money, and we need that much money in the investment balance. But then we showed very simply what 30,000 square meters would look like. And it was 2 tower buildings, which they disliked totally, of course. And so it's a kind of reality check also, to show on the terrain in a kind of simulation of reality what things could look like. So that's a negative way. Sometimes it's in a positive way. And then it's really to explore the potential of a site, to show how a site could be developed in another way and really become something interesting. So that kind of use of our tool, designing images, maps, is really important for me. The last tool is what is existing in many cities is a design review panel. This kind of, like in Germany or Switzerland, you have the Bouwcollegium, sorry. In the Netherlands, you have the Welstandscommissie. We have in several Belgian cities, we have quality chambers. So that's a design review with experts from the administration, but in many cases also experts from the professional fields, so architects. And they discuss about the quality of the project also ahead of the discussions that are really linked to the administrative or the legislative aspects of the building permit. Because too often in discussing on a building permit, the administration is looking at the conformity with the legislation or with the regulation. And too often a kind of fundamental debate, okay, it corresponds to the recommendation, but is it also really a good project? So that kind of debate sometimes lacks. And so the quality chamber is the kind of formal way in order to guarantee that that debate happens and that it is organized also in a structured way, that there is a report, that positions are clear, and that it is also transparent, that we are not discussing somewhere in a restaurant on a project. No, we are discussing in a formal meeting. And so in the new Brussels planning legislation, this has become compulsory now for all projects above 5,000 square meters. And so all projects above 5,000 square meters, the building permit or the planning application demand should be accompanied by a design quality review report by the bouwmeester, which is the result of this kind of discussions ahead. So I think it's a nice example of the way that how you can integrate within a hard system of legislation the official possibility of discussing also in another way, in a less official way, on projects. It's a kind of example of how you can anticipate on this kind of hybrid way of improving quality of project as well. We do a lot of communication, so raising awareness among the public is, but especially among the professional sector, is really the task of the bouwmeester in Belgian cities. And then I would like to perhaps to finish with 3 examples of another way of influencing the debate. So there are the concrete specific tools as I have explained them. But of course, a bouwmeester is also contributing to the debate on how we want the city to evolve, what do we want to put on the agenda. And so these are 3 themes that are quite important for Brussels now, where the bouwmeester has been helping to put them on the agenda. That's by participating in a public debate, by writing articles in the newspaper and so, by working also behind the screens, but also by organizing competitions in order to prove that the imagination of good architects could help to develop this kind of vision of the city. So first one is the productive city, the idea that we should integrate or keep some productive activities within the city itself, that it shouldn't be pushed out, all of them out of the city. So we need for local employment, but also for good functioning, for instance, of the circular economy of the city, we need to preserve some space for productive city within the city. The second one is we have this habit in Brussels of office buildings, especially European quarter office buildings that are outdated, that are being demolished and then reconstructed. It's not very sustainable at all. It's in fact a kind of consumption economy within the building economy. And so there is a lot of emphasis now on adaptive reuse. How could we keep the building, keep the structure, keep the concrete? There's a lot of carbon embedded in the concrete, and reuse a lot of materials in order to adapt those buildings. So instead of demolishing them, reusing them. So there has been the work of Rotor in Brussels that is quite pioneering, and it's becoming more and more general policy now that we evolve towards the reuse and the adaptive reuse of building instead of replacing buildings. So again, that's one of the topics and themes that is quite current in Brussels now, and that's where the bouwmeester is helping, putting it on the agenda. The third one is, and the last one, in our Belgian cities, we have a medieval core, a kind of 19th century belt, and then a kind of 20th century belt around it. So a more open urban fabric that was mainly constructed in the second half of the 20th century. And we can see now that after the many urban renewal projects for the more inner city, that the need is growing to renew, to update those areas now. And we don't know the recipes quite well. So, because also the fabric is quite heterogeneous. It's big slabs, it's open spaces, it's part of suburban housing as well. And so we are developing an approach in order to intervene in those areas and to make those areas more sustainable, but also to preserve the open spaces because we need them. And at the same time, we have to densify the city. So it's a big question. And again, it's one of the issues that the bouwmeester is contributing in Brussels, for instance, by organizing a research by design competition in order to come up with new ideas. So these were 3, let's say, topics on the level of content. So I think you've understood, and I've announced it in the beginning, I think in a policy of architecture, you need also to anticipate or to provide the possibility of these kind of what I would call soft power mechanisms. So the hard power mechanism is the building permit, the planning recommendation. But on top of that, if you want to promote quality in architecture and urban design, you have to look for other mechanisms as well. And in the Urban Maestro project, but also in what Veronica Valk has been doing with the Commission, a lot of those soft power mechanisms in Europe has been traced, and it has been proven that in many cases, they really make the difference. They make a difference between a good basis level and then a level of excellent projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian, for sharing your inspiring experience. Now I would like to invite all the panelists to switch on their cameras because we will start our common discussion. We will have some 45 minutes. It depends on how the discussion goes further. Okay, I think that everyone is here now. So my first question is a provocative one. And depending on your answer, we might end the discussion right away. So we heard from many of you about many great examples of initiatives run by state architects, by local authorities, by local communities, by NGOs. We also heard from Mika about some local architectural policies. So my question is, do we need a national architectural policy, or is it something that is not necessary? So I would like to start from Veronica, if she's here. So what you have seen lots of examples from the whole Europe. So what would be your insights about the necessity of architecture?
Well, I think Joao would be really the expert here to highlight the contributions that different countries have gained from having an architecture policy. But I think it's quite evident because even this exercise of coming up with an architecture policy that really builds on the specific governance structure and the local context of a country. I think it's very important also to go through this thought exercise so that it becomes clearer to all parties what is their role in achieving the quality goals. How can each level in the governance system support achieving those goals, etc. So having such a central document is as if a clarification of a mindset or a mind frame that enables then for each and every one within those very complex network of implementation to really understand where we are and what is there for us to do together. But as I said, a policy document alone might not do much. And this is why it's very important that the policy document is actually created together with all stakeholders, with all relevant parties, and then it ensures that each one is also taking it seriously. And it should be as if an agreement within the country who takes which responsibility for what exactly.
Thank you, Veronica. Joao, would you like to add something from the perspective of analyzing all the European architectural policies?
Well, that's a tricky question. It depends of the maturity of the policies, because, as you know, there are different contexts and levels of compromise in the historical context that can justify that type of success or failure. So the impact is a very difficult question in terms of measuring what are the outputs. It's more easy. So you can say that certain documents or certain policy approaches were able to deliver certain outputs. The impact in terms of the quality of the built environment or the quality of better places is a very long-term goal, and it's an incremental process that fundamentally I think it tries to create a cultural change of the different actors and stakeholders that are intervening in the built environment. So coming back to your question, I think that the main advantage of having such a document or a policy is to show the way and put on the table a will, an ambition, and define a certain vision that is shared between different actors. And of course, try to make it operational. It's the key. So try to define certain measures or a realistic action plan that can be adapted to the context. So the same in Lithuania will not be able to happen in Portugal, because they have different regulatory and different systems of governance. But we could inspire looking at these documents and try to see what type of instruments or actors are put in place. So I think already Veronica mentioned that without having certain resources or people in charge of these documents and trying to put it forward, it will be a very well-intentioned document that may not really change much, instead of only of discourse or ideas. So if you want to have some impact, at least at the long run, we need to have that type of initiatives or practical tools that can interfere or interact or mobilize or influence or promote, as Christian was mentioning.
Thank you, Joao. If anyone else wants to add something, please raise your hand on the screen, the yellow one, not your real. Okay, I can see that Mika is raising his hand, so go ahead. And then Christer.
Yeah, I mean, I would just maybe add from the perspective of just kind of fresh, coming from an architectural policy meeting to this panel, that somehow in the background of the entire current process that we've had is this question that why are we doing this? Because, you know, the time window is now over 20 years that we've had the previous program, and no one has somehow, you know, we've survived without it so far. And I think it's kind of one of those things where there are so many policies. There are different policies about cultural heritage. There are policies about housing. There are policies about everything, and everything points to the same direction, following the same development goals. And the challenge has been to try to keep in mind like what this policy is about and why it kind of does overlap, but then what is really the sort of the line to follow, that what are the sort of architectural or planning as a device how to navigate into the future. And I don't think that we've answered the question in the Finnish policy, but in full. But thing is that that there are people who really need it in their work as well, and this is true for especially for the regional and local level. For those regional level governance agencies, for instance, who are kind of like trying to have something that the government on the state level has made a kind of like clear policy that what are the core things when it comes to architecture in terms of then to the development they're going for. I think those kind of like the ground on which to stand on and the things to hold on to, that's kind of the need for the national policy.
Thank you very much, Mika. Now, Christer, probably he would like to make a comment and relate the architecture policy to the work of the state architect. Does it help to the state architect?
Well, thank you. I will always give some comments. Well, when I proposed in my committee to have a national architect, I was quite inspired by the Bouwmeesters in both Belgium and the Netherlands. So it's really nice to hear Christian describing how they are working, because I think it's so important that someone takes the role of working in between all the other things, because to work as a catalyst, as an inspirer, I really think that's a good idea. And also someone who could explain the role of architecture. I mean, as I said, everything ends up in the built environment. That's how it is. And we have to be aware of that, and someone has to explain that for the politicians. And that means that the built environment, that is the place where we are living our daily life. And of course, that will inflect our social aspects and so on. So have a role of a policy and a national architect means that the policy also could survive when it meets the daily life, so to say. So I do really think it's important.
Thank you, Christian. Now Eva wants to add something. Go ahead, Eva.
Thank you. From a point of a person working at an NGO, I think I have to agree with the previous speakers that it is truly an important thing to have a national architectural policy program. And one point is the communications point of view. So I think it's a clear and loud and a good message that from the highest government level that architecture is an important issue that we need to be working with and working on and working for, and just bringing architecture to the forefront it's a statement, you know, that you can make by doing an architectural policy program. And I think, referring to what Mika said earlier, that there are different strategic papers and policy programs on different issues, housing or cultural heritage and such. But I think if you don't have an architectural policy program, there's an important piece missing. There's the point of view of architecture itself.
Thank you, Eva. Christian.
Yeah, I would like to add something on the level of governance and the institutional level, because of course I think a national policy, architectural policy is welcome and is useful and is needed. On the other hand, and that's perhaps sometimes a kind of mistake, of a kind of blindness on the level of the European Commission, that they are very much reasoning in nations and not so much in cities and regions. Because in Belgium, in fact, we don't have a national policy. Also because it's not a competence on the national level. So we have 3 policies that are quite different according to the 3 regions. And we can also see that the dynamics, in fact, is sometimes more in cities. And that goes for the European landscape as well. You can see what is happening in Paris now on the level of quality of architecture and urban space. In fact, is not linked to a national policy. And so you need both. You need the national policy, but that is also enabling or empowering the dynamics that are more local. And so that's quite important for me.
Thank you, Christian. Now Kieran wants to step in.
Yes, I think there's a number of valid points made there. What I would say, and I think the aspect of the culture and your history is very important. So if you have a country that is very strongly led from the center, or you have a country that's very regionalized, they are very different things to achieve an architectural policy. And an architectural policy, I would say, it's a bit like flying an aircraft high up in the sky, but you then have to land it. So you need landing gear to bring these ideas to ground and make them happen. And that's where the key gap is. If you only have a policy which is aspirational and you don't have the steps to achieve it, then you might as well not have a policy. And that's the thing we have learned. We would have quite strong central government, and it has been a big advantage to me to have a policy of architecture, because I've been able to say to people who took a very financial view only, hold on, there's a policy of architecture that you also have to listen to. And they're always a bit surprised when that is said to them. But that also means that you then have to bed it down into the systems so that it becomes more natural. And I would be concerned, I know that I knew some of the previous Dutch state architects, my wife is Dutch, so I knew Floris and a number of the other people there, and they went through a very difficult period where they were just seen as advisors, but no one paid real attention to them. And that's the thing you have to watch as well. So if your structure requires you to be embedded in the system, then that's what you do, that as part of your system. So for Lithuania, I don't know how that would be the appropriate one, whether it's a strong central government or more regional, but they would be key considerations for you to take on board and see how that would suit your purpose. But in our purpose in Ireland, what we have found is that system works. And the gradual thing now of, for instance, that it's not just city-based. And as a landscape architect, I'd say to people, we have beautiful landscape, we must treat our landscape well. And so the farming people and others must be involved. And most of those people feel very excluded by what they see as the cultural elite in the city. So you have to be seen that you're not just one thing. You represent many things and you try and balance those things. So how that would be, because you don't want to exacerbate or make more difficult the urban and rural divide that's often in the city. And so that aspect of bringing along a wider group with you, so that you cannot be isolated, that you're only the cultural speakers and you don't then address other issues, so that you have to have genuine concern for how people economically can work, how they culturally can work, and what is the way forward for that country. So I would think for Lithuania, you need to decide which is the model that suits you best, because this model works for us, but it might not work for Belgium, because Belgium has that divide between the French and Dutch speakers. And that's something of a reality. And you have different things in Scandinavia where, like Finland has an established architectural history because of Aalto and all the other people. So, and Sweden would have something saying because of Asplund and Leverance and all of those guys. So it's a different thing of trying to establish yourself. So, I would think pick the things that suit you best for Lithuania.
Thank you, Pierre. And now Veronica, and then I will come up with the next question.
To take down the hand, yeah.
I completely agree with what has been said, and then maybe just following up Christian's remark and also building on what Kieran has just said, but also coming from Estonia and speaking from that experience is that I guess that the size of the country, when we look at the Baltic countries, is so small that having different policies for different regions really wouldn't work, in the sense that the competencies tend to accumulate to the biggest and the bigger urban areas. For instance, in Estonia, we have basically two, where we could talk about a city's own architecture policy. But for the rest of Estonia, what we have gathered is that we might not even need, let's say, a general architecture policy, but we need a coherent spatial policy that would cover a broader this kind of policy area. And then what we really need is capacity building among the people that actually administer and then advance and take care of the living environment in places. So and that also becomes a difficulty, in a sense, when we look at the structure of our countries and the habitation layout and the habitation system, because, for instance, capacity building in very rural and remote municipalities is quite difficult. While on the other hand, when we try to build a unit or a team centrally, the local municipalities tend to kind of not be so willing to kind of work with this kind of central consultation system. So it's a tricky thing to find a very good balance of how to help the very rural and the very remote areas, while also taking care of the capital city and the region and the very different problems that arise there. So I think what we are looking at in the Baltic context is the need for a very nuanced and smart, quite thin structure that does very precise things targeted at those focus points that are needed. So policy papers, yes, they can work at a national level, but then, you know, it's this question of how to bridge it to the local municipalities and actually make sure that people at different administrative levels pick it up and then take it seriously and then actually want to implement it.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Most of you have mentioned the word stakeholders and the importance to involve as many stakeholders as possible in the process of making and implementing architectural policy. And I liked very much the metaphor of Kieran about the airplane. So my question will be, who are the pilots, who are the passengers, and who are sitting in the airport? Who are the stakeholders that we should talk to, and what is the role of each group of stakeholders making the architectural policy? Because probably not everyone would sit around the table and draft the visionary plan of national architectural policy, but at some point everyone should be engaged. How to do it? So, well, I will address my question to my colleagues from Finland because I think that they got some answers here.
Yeah, I hope we do. Well, I think that well, the Finnish planning and planning system is like totally up to the municipalities. Like they have the absolute monopoly to basically decide what they will do. Perhaps this is similar in other countries as well. So I think that on the sort of the problem that we often find is that whenever something happens somewhere where there isn't a kind of a culture of good governance and architecture and being involved, or we don't have the quality panels to judge whether some development is, that is where somehow the architectural policy in general makes most sense. Because then for bigger cities and regions, they often already have quite strong culture of inclusion and kind of like bringing the stakeholders already together and negotiating in varied ways. So when it comes to like how do stakeholders, how does everyone come together, the realities that we face are that these situations where they can come together can just be like totally different from one region to another. Perhaps something similar that Veronica was talking about. So where we see somehow the potential that has not been yet fulfilled by architectural policy work, I think, is that that in those regions, for instance, where there doesn't exist in the normal sort of development work, government work, planning work, getting investments, projects, and like what ends up becoming the built environment. In that process, there is not much room currently for having these discussions. So we're thinking things like, what if we just kind of go on a tour around the country? What if we try to organize hackathons or something for these regions, and to bring these actors together, because we have quite strong kind of like parallel organizations. We have regional councils, for instance, that we have regional museum networks. We have all kinds of NGOs in the civil society. We have sort of economic centers. We have things that kind of like do the work, but they just very rarely come to the same table. And these are the kind of new things that can happen because there is some sort of expectation that something will happen because of the new policy. And there is a momentum to try these things out. So I don't have a very extra clear answer to the stakeholder question, but I think it's this thing that how to bring people together, at least for a moment, where they consider what are we doing, where is these decisions, these developments lead us in this particular region or in this particular site.
Thank you, Mika. When talking about the stakeholders, we mean, well, we here, most of us are architects, and this conference is initiated by the Association of Architects. So many people could think that architecture policy is something for the architects and probably for politicians. But we know the wideness of architectural profession and the issues that architecture deals with. So we just take the UN 17 agenda, and we know that all those issues regarding social equality, cultural heritage, hunger, sustainability, ecological issues, they are all tackled by architecture as well. So probably we should bring to the table all the professionals from all the fields, which sounds like a utopia. Well, we are heading towards paradise, so let's think about a utopia. But also we have the business as well behind the architecture. So probably the business also should be involved into the architectural policy, because, well, if we design some vision that has no meat, that is no finance, then it wouldn't go further. And then last but not least, we have people in the center, which is a society. So I would ask Kieran, who was telling us about the process of public consultation. How did it go, and how did you involve the society and all the other stakeholders in the process of discussing the architectural policy?
What we did, Ruta, was we publicly advertised that we were having a series of meetings, and those meetings then were held with a number of people who acted as facilitators. It was open to the public. Anybody could come. Now, you always get the people who know about these things or have an interest, and they were the majority that showed up. But we did have a number of individuals with very strong views, like people who said there should be no more building, and architects destroy the world and they should all be ashamed of themselves. And you had that experience up to political people who were interested. Okay, is there much interest from the general public here? And so it was interesting for me. I sat in the general group. I didn't lead the group. It was interesting to see how those different reactions were. And over a period of 5 different workshops, things did begin to clarify. So maybe after the second one, there was an agreement that there was a certain number of issues that people could all agree were issues. And then we said, well, okay, so how would you address those issues? So one of them, for instance, about impact on landscape. Many of the architects involved had no interest particularly in that. They all said they were in favor of biodiversity, but when it came to what did that mean, they were sort of nonplussed. They were sort of looking, well, okay, well, somebody else to do that. So what I tried to bring to it then, as we got further into it, was, okay, you have these issues, and a bit like that analogy of the flying aircraft, and you have to land it. To make this achievable, you have to do certain things. And I think this is how it could work. And that was well enough received, because it was done in a way that was asking questions, not telling them answers. And then by the time of the 5th meeting, there was agreement on 5 key principles, and that was essential. So then we wrote that up, and we then distributed that to all the people who had come to any of the workshops, and they had a chance in 3 weeks to respond to that. And then we called it a big conference meeting where everybody was invited into a conference center, and that then discussed the 5 key issues and what the subsets of those would be. And that then led to, okay, now we write all that up and we present to government. So that was the process we did. So there was nobody could say that they did not have an opportunity to contribute. Now, as we're getting now closer to the finish, there are people saying, oh, I didn't think it was going to turn out like this. But you'll always get that. I mean, you cannot keep everybody happy all the time. But if you keep most of them reasonably quiet and happy. And it is a case of, you know, architects have to open up as well to seeing, allowing other people to make comment on what they see as their sacred ground. And so that's a skill that the architects have to learn. They have other skills, but they need to have that skill of listening and interpreting. Now, that doesn't mean they have to be slaves to that public view, but they have to, I think, engage with it and not dismiss it. And we had a few interesting within meetings ourselves of architects with the Institute of Architects and with groupings of having very strong views, like we're not, who said we have to listen to that? And my view always on that was, if you create situations where you exclude people, what happens then is they become people who will oppose you on every issue for no benefit, just because they feel excluded. So there was a lot of effort went into that. And the plus of that was that when we did the draft, just before that went to government, there was no objections, which I was very surprised. I thought there'd be some people, but there wasn't. Now, that process took about a year. So, and we socialized it on social media, and we also, in publications to architects, we did that. So there was a lot of wide work done by many different groups. And for instance, groups like the Irish Architectural Foundation and the Archive, which my office would help fund with grant money, they also led a wider view of, and then the arts centres did the same. So we tried to make it as wide as possible, but we did bring it back to a focus of, we know how to implement stuff, say, in government, and that has to be a part of it as well. And what surprised me was that people accepted that. It wasn't a case of, who are you to tell us? It was a case, well, you have listened, and we do accept that you do know how to maybe implement. And so, okay, we now support. So that has been a very good system, but it took about a year to 15 months. So if you're planning that, if you try to do it quicker, people tend to resent it and think you're going too quickly and not listening to them.
Yeah, listening takes time. Veronica, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I agree with what Kieran just brought up, but I also want, coming back to your question, I also want to maybe turn attention to this careful consideration of how different questions are phrased, because when we talk about economic benefits, then perhaps it's also a question of communication, that instead of short-term business profit or this kind of immediate economic gain, what we are after is actually this kind of long-term economic value by creating these more durable development projects of better quality. And also what we are doing with the architectural policy is actually we're creating these more favorable conditions for economic development. So in fact, we are, if we are clever in taking into account this cumulative view of as many cost groups as possible and really projecting into the future, then it's not about well, if we talk about the business stakeholders or the real estate developers and so forth, then it's a question also for us as policymakers or partners in policymaking, how to communicate this long-term gain that is actually beneficial also economically for them as well as for others.
Thank you, Veronica. Now Christian and then Krista.
Yeah, I think if it's about stakeholders, I think you should avoid that an architectural policy is perceived as something to help architects or to protect architects. So, because then it becomes a kind of corporatism. And so that's why in Belgium, often the bouwmeesters present themselves, we are not working for the architects, we are working for the clients, for the commissioners. And that goes as well for public clients as private clients. So I think it's very important to have them with you in the architectural policy, of course, the public clients, but also the private clients, so the real estate developers. Because the city is not produced by public buildings only, so it's a lot of housing projects that are really, of course, private development. And one can see that amongst developers, you have the ones who are generally interested in architecture, so they exist. They are not all bad ones. And then you have the ones who understand in a more perhaps rational way that contributing to a better urban environment, better quality on public space, for instance, that on the long term, it's also efficient for them because it helps you to sell your apartments. And so I think that's, so we in Belgium now, we have a good relationship with the private sector as well. And I think that's very important as stakeholders. On the other hand, I would add a very short, let's say, autocritical remark, and that's about the public at large. Because up to a certain level, the success of the Belgian system and also the collaboration with private developers has another side, and that it is perhaps becoming too technocratic, too much among professionals, and that you have a kind of perfect understanding amongst professionals, level of government, level of the practice of architects, level of the clients and also the private ones. But that we are lacking now, and so that's really the challenge for the next years, I think, in Brussels and in Belgium, to involve civil society and to involve the public at large in this discussion on what is quality, and for instance, also in opening up the big competitions, architecture competitions, to civil society and to the public at large. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Now, Christer, and then Eva with the last comment. I'm sorry, but the time is ticking out. So, Christer, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think it's really important that the policy signalizes that it's not only for architects. I think that's very, very important. And giving the policy a name that also reflects that. I mean, when I called my commission as the designed living environment, it also signalizes that that is complex. It includes people and it includes also social aspects. I had a grand tour during the whole of Sweden in the beginning to collect aspects, because you can't know them yourself in the beginning. So you need to meet people to get in touch with all the aspects. I think that the normal, the usual suspects, so to say, the stakeholders that are always present, they always find their way into the system. So trying to, if I should done this again, I will have much more focus on the citizen-driven organizations, non-commercial groups, civil society, and so on, you know them all, to find them and to really know what do they need, especially when we in the future are going to work more with existing buildings, as you said, many of you, and the people are living there already, and you know what are their needs. So I think don't forget the civil sectors, don't forget the inhabitants in the process.
Thank you, Christer. And now Eva.
Thank you. Yeah. Good points from everybody, and I totally agree, and the wider public is an important stakeholder to keep along in the process and the implementation. Of course, it's a hard stakeholder to get along, but it should be there on the table, sitting at the table. And maybe something that is sort of obvious in I think in all architectural policy processes, but always sort of it's good to mention are of course the silent stakeholders. So nature, say children and youth, people that don't have such strong voices from all socioeconomic groups and of course the future generations as well. So all the silent voices need to be somehow made heard.
Okay, that's a very vast task to approach all the groups, but yeah, probably this is the only way to proceed further. I have to thank you very much for today's discussion. I think that we could continue for 3 hours or even more. I am sure that you will be contacted in the future by myself or by my team or the other team who will run the issue of architecture policy of Lithuania. But for now, for the start of the discussion at our national level, I think that we've heard enough of very inspiring ideas and thoughts. So thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for joining us. You will have this recording on our Facebook. I will share the link with you if you want to use it in the future. And for our audience, I will just remind that now we will have a lunch break and we will meet again at 2:30. You can use the same link to watch the conference broadcast from the Parliament of Lithuania. For all the guests of the panel, I can see that you can also look at our discussion from the Parliament, but unfortunately it will be in Lithuanian. So if you want to listen to Lithuanian language, you are really welcome. But for now, thank you very much, and I wish you a very good weekend. And I don't say goodbye to you. I say until the next meetings. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Nice to see you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.